Buonasera, good afternoon, buenas tardes. My name is Lawrence Schimel, and I'm going to be the moderator for this session, which is Trans-cendent, Embracing Inclusive Gender Expression Beyond Tokenism, or issue books. I'm an author in both English and Spanish as an author and an anthologist, I published over 130 books, and as a translator, 190. I do work quite a lot with LGBT material for readers of all ages, from board books through LGBT queer theory. I did a book called Homosexuals, Challenging Assumptions about Gender and Sexuality. So these are issues that I think about a lot and am very interested to read a lot about, and I'm happy to have this esteemed panel to scratch the surface. There's a lot that we can cover, and so we have 5 esteemed panelists with us. One panelist is missing, Susana Barsotti, who is a professor of children's literature at the University of Roma, isn't able to be with us today. Her work especially centers on fairy tales, and especially the role of women in fairy tales. You can find her bio on the University of Rome website. She's done work such as the fairy tale recent interpretations, female characters, and contemporary rewritings. She sends her regrets that she isn't able to join us today for this discussion. So we have an amazing cast of people from very, very different experiences to talk about inclusive, trans-inclusive and queer-inclusive works for younger readers. So I'm going to introduce each person and ask a specific question. We've got a lot of stuff to cover in a very short amount of time. So immediately to my left is Edward van de Vendel, who's an award-winning Dutch author for readers of all ages, also a translator, and is also a publisher. Although I will also mention that yesterday it was announced that he is the Hans Christian Andersen nominee from the Netherlands for this year. So congratulations to Edward. But he's here today, and the first question I'm going to ask is for him to talk about his experience as a publisher. So he's been involved in 2 important projects, one of which was a queer-inclusive, a queer-specific imprint called Glow, which was for Querido. And he also has a new publishing company that is not exclusively queer, but also that is very queer inclusive. So if you could talk about, especially, why is it important to have a dedicated imprint? Why was it necessary to create that, and the value that that has for supporting trans-inclusive literature?
Yes, thank you, Lawrence. So this imprint was an imprint in a bigger company. The bigger company was publishing my own books, and I very much like to do things with many people, because I just like to be with many people. And I thought, we have to make a series with books that, as you said, specifically are aimed, have specifically LGBTQI plus main characters. And this was issued 5 years ago, I think maybe a bit longer. And at that point, of course, people asked, in these times, is this still necessary? Because all books should be inclusive. We already have some books in that way, or isn't this going back to the 80s or the 90s? All these questions. And I think all these people had fair points. But there was something else. And that was, one thing was, when you make an imprint like this, you also have a clearer visibility. So it's much easier to find these books. And that was quite important for us, to have young people recognize themselves, and not only recognizing themselves by coincidence in a book, but you can go to a store and see, this is one of the Glow books, and then you know that there will be people like you in the book. So that was one thing. Another thing is, and I think this is an aspect that we might forget from time to time, is that by doing this, we also clearly showed our solidarity. And I think that is a very nice thing, is if a company, and in this case, Querido, very nice company from the Netherlands, clearly said, we think this is important. We like you and we like books about you. So this was the message.
And can you also talk a little bit about Blauw Gras and why it's slightly different in the new, but it's still queer and trans inclusive, but what the philosophy is for the new program.
Yeah, so I did that with this GLOW program in the Netherlands. By the way, we started it off, so we translated novels from all kinds of countries, but we started it off with one big interview book, where I myself interviewed 25 LGBTQI plus young people between 16 and 23 from all places in the Netherlands and Flanders, Belgium, but also from all kinds of backgrounds. And we specifically I did not interview them about gender or sexuality, I interviewed them about their life. So my first question was always, what is glowing in your life? Hence the word glow. And sometimes it was, of course, sexuality or gender, but sometimes it was swimming, or it was friendship, or something else. So we really love that. So now your second question is, I got...
Also, because I think that most of the GLOW books were translations into Dutch.
After that, yeah.
And the new program is different slightly.
That's right. So after that, I started my own publishing house, and this is just, that's the way I explain it, it's a queer-owned company, but it's not exclusively queer, it's just something that I find very normal. And I also think that people expect from me that we try to represent all backgrounds. But again, as in the interview book, the first question was, what is glowing in your life? With these books, the first question is this a glowing book? And it could be for various reasons. But having said that, I really enjoy buying books where there is a new way of representation, or where I learn something, or when there's mainly a queer joy, actually. I think the queer joy is for me now the first criterion.
So on Edward's left, I don't know if you've done, yeah, thanks. We have Rosa Almario from the Philippines. She is what is the official title at Adarna House?
Vice President.
Vice President of Adarna House. She wears many hats, so she's an educator with many, many years of experience. She's also herself an author of 2 books. I was just for the first time in the Philippines, and one of the things that really struck me was how prevalent queer stories were throughout all of the publishing programs, particularly in Adarna House, who has championed queer voices for a long time, but just completely in the mainstream. That teens who are reading manga would pick up queer stories as well, or Chuck Berry Pascal has a gay zombie series that just had the 2nd or the 3rd volume just came out and huge lines of fans, and it was all just included as a regular part. Graphic novels from your comics imprint, the
Baligtas.
Thank you.
Don't tell me you're speaking Filipino now, Lawrence.
I'll get there. But which takes it combines multiple queer love stories with Filipino mythology, and has had multiple editions. And so, if you could just talk about the different, also almost all of the queer books are generated in the Philippines, so there isn't as much importing books. Mine happens to be an
except
exception.
yours.
Mine is an exception, which happily sold out during the fair. So
yes, we had Lawrence in Manila for the first time ever in his life, and we ran out of his books. So he could only sign, I think, around five books. That's how sellable Lawrence is. But
no, the queer thing, I think, and how just accepted it is in the Philippines. So if you could, my view of the Philippines before having gone was very Catholic, conservative country, and so I was pleasantly surprised at how open it was.
yes, and I think I wanted to say I wanted to mention that this talk who was the first publisher to start the ball rolling, but I actually don't remember. But I do think that we just reached a tipping point in Manila. And then everybody started coming out with queer stories, and it was at the same time that the local drag scene is also big right now. And if you talk to people like me who run K-12 institutions, who run schools, this is also the time that children, the teens are more expressive of gender and are more aware of their gender identity and are more assertive of their gender identity. So it was just the right time. I do remember around 15 years ago, I got my first queer submission. It was a story of about a child with lesbian parents, and at that time I knew we weren't ready to come out with a title. I wasn't ready for the reaction of the market, and I did feel that the Filipino market wasn't ready. But as Lawrence pointed out, at the Philippine Book Festival that happened around 2 weeks ago, there was it was just prevalent. Queer literature was everywhere. In Adarna, we're the oldest publishing house. We turned 45 this year. We have a board book about different family setups. We have Lawrence's books, and what I love about Lawrence's books is that there is no tokenism. It's normal. We want queer stories to be typical, and we want queer stories to be normal and accepted. We made sure we also came out with novels because we wanted queer voices for queer teen voices. So I think it's great. I think it's great that we're not getting a lot of pushback, and instead we're producing literature that helps teens, different teens and kids gain acceptance, and it also helps explain how they feel and how they are to others. So I'm glad we're part of that.
And also, I think that the books are presented for all readers. That is, that queer stories are relevant to all readers, which was one of the things that was just so nice to see in the Philippines. That in a lot of, I live in Madrid and in Spain, and a lot of times, I'm originally from New York, and in New York, queer material is seen as only marginalized. Whereas heterosexual works are seen as universal. And it's like with the books that Adarna
It's like we read each other.
Yeah, and so it's nice that that's the philosophy of these are just good stories, and it's important for the same way that the queer kids will also have heterosexual stories, that the heterosexuals have queer.
And I know it's so ironic because we really are pretty conservative, and I think this is the first time that the Catholic Church has failed in the Philippines. Like they're not able to stop it or kids from expressing themselves. It's just a joke. Okay, I don't want to offend any Catholics or any Catholics back home. But I am also surprised about how open we are and how quickly readers are taking to queer literature. Not just queer readers, but also hetero.
Okay, we're going to pass now to a duo. We have Marie-Aude Murail and her daughter Constance Robert Murail. I know Marie-Aude is a very prolific writer here in Italy, very translated. Unfortunately, not very translated into English, but also in Spain, where I live, a lot of translations into Spanish. I first became aware of her work through the IBI Best Outstanding Books for Young People with Disabilities catalog, where one of the books was honored in the catalog, and one of my books happened to be honored, so that was how I discovered her work originally. And so they have a very long-running, important series called, I'm not going to butcher this, Sauveur et Fils? Okay, which includes an FTM character. So if you can please tell us more about the series and the character and the inclusion.
Ok. Je ne sais pas si c'est le café, la fatigue ou le sujet, mais j'ai le cœur qui bat trop fort. J'ai l'habitude de parler de ce genre de sujet dans une salle de classe avec la porte fermée et je prends le temps de savoir qui j'ai en face de moi. Je vais donc vous faire confiance.
So, I don't know if it's the coffee or the tiredness or the topic, but I have, my heart is running fast, beating very loudly right now. When I talk about this kind of topic, I usually do it in front of a small classroom with the door locked and a very, intimate setting. So I'm just going to have to trust you all.
Quand j'étais une petite fille, dans ma tête, j'étais un petit garçon. Je ne savais pas pourquoi, mais c'était comme ça. J'étais très attirée par tout ce qui était l'homosexualité sans qu'on m'ait jamais expliqué ce que c'était. Et à un certain âge, j'ai commencé à m'habiller comme un garçon.
So when I was a little girl, I thought I was a little boy, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I felt naturally attracted to the topic of homosexuality, even though no one had ever pronounced that name, that word in front of me. I did not know what I was attracted to, and at a certain age, I started dressing myself up as a man.
C'est un peu délicat de dire ces choses-là devant ma fille, mais nous sommes en thérapie familiale, donc tout va bien.
So it's a little delicate to say all of these things in front of my daughter, but since we're doing family therapy, it's all good.
Je suis donc tombée amoureuse, j'avais 17 ans, je me suis mariée à 18 ans et je n'avais pas compris exactement qui j'étais, ni même qui j'épousais. Et quelques années plus tard, je n'ai plus supporté du tout les rayons féminins dans les magasins. Et je suis tombée amoureuse d'un garçon homosexuel qui est tombé amoureux de moi, ce qui faisait de moi véritablement un garçon.
So I fell in love, I was just 17, and I got married at 18, at a time where I didn't know who I was, nor who I was marrying. So a few years later, I realized that I could not stand anymore the women's fashion in stores, and I fell in love with a homosexual man who actually fell in love back, which actually meant that I was a man, sort of.
Par parenthèse, il était aussi amoureux de mon mari.
And just between, as a parenthesis, he was also in love with my husband at the time.
Je ne savais pas ce qui m'arrivait. Et j'ai repris ma vie après cet épisode. J'ai donc eu 3 enfants. Et puis, en 2015, j'ai lu un article dans un journal qui parlait de, on disait à ce moment-là transsexualité, je crois que maintenant on dit transidentité, c'était dans le journal Le Monde. Et c'était des interviews de jeunes enfants, de jeunes gens qui racontaient exactement qui j'étais. Et je me suis dit, alors c'était ça.
So I didn't really know what I was doing at the time, and my life just went back to normal. I had 3 kids, and many years after that, in 2015, I came across an article in a French journal called Le Monde, who talked about, at the time, the word was transsexual kids. Now we say trans, or we talk about transgender or trans-identity, but at the time it was that word. And it was just interviews of young people talking about their experiences growing up with gender dysphoria, and that word and their experiences suddenly resonated, and I thought to myself, well, it was that all along.
Et j'ai écrit une série qui s'appelle donc Sauveur et fils avec un psychologue qui va recevoir une petite jeune fille de 12 ans qui s'appelle Ella et qui dans sa tête est un chevalier, le chevalier Elliot. Cette jeune fille me ressemble physiquement et ce qu'elle raconte c'est mon adolescence. Elle croit, cette jeune fille, son psychologue va lui faire croire que si elle veut devenir Elliot dans sa tête, c'est parce qu'il y avait avant elle un petit garçon qui est mort et qu'elle est en quelque sorte le fils de remplacement. Dans les psychothérapies, souvent on croit qu'on a découvert le secret. Je dis souvent qu'une psychothérapie c'est une poupée russe et on ouvre la poupée, il y a un secret, mais il y a encore une poupée et il y a un autre secret. Et donc Ella va résister à l'explication de son psy et elle finira par lui dire « Je veux être un garçon ».
And so I wrote a series called Sauveur et Fils. The first installment of the series is into 2015. It's a series about a psychologist for kids and teenagers, and one of his young patients is called Ella. Ella calls herself the Elliot the Knight. When she tells herself stories about herself, she is a young boy, a young knight. And this young lady resembles me physically from when I was young, and she explains to her therapist in adolescence that closely resembles mine. And the shrink wrongly assumes that she feels that way because she has a stillborn brother. She discovers that a young boy died before she was born, and that boy was called Elliot. And that stillborn baby would be the explanation of how she feels. But I usually say that therapy is like a bunch of Russian dolls, like Matryoshka. You open and you think you've cracked the code and you've got the secret. And you open and there's another secret. And then you open and there's another secret. So she resists the explanation of her therapist, and at some point she says, well, I want to be a boy.
Et il y a un dialogue entre ce sauveur et cette Ella pendant plusieurs romans, plusieurs saisons de Sauveur et Fils. Et en fait, c'est un dialogue entre moi et moi. Le psychologue essaie de la convaincre que finalement, ça suffira qu'elle soit un écrivain et qu'elle existe au masculin dans les livres. Et c'est la solution que j'ai trouvée, d'écrire au jeu masculin dans les livres. Et Sauveur essaie de lui dire, fais comme Marie-Aude.
And so this dialogue between the therapist and the patient unfolds over several installments. And this dialogue between Sauveur and Ella is actually a dialogue between me and me. Because Sauveur tries to convince Ella that it will be sufficient for her to exist in the masculine voice as a narrator, as a writer, that she can become what Marie-Aude has become through her writing, a young man, a young knight, a young sorcerer, and that it will be enough for her to exist that way.
Mais les personnages vous échappent. Souvent je dis qu'un romancier c'est Geppetto qui au début tire les ficelles de la marionnette et puis la marionnette s'en va toute seule. Et au début j'ai tiré les ficelles d'Ella et Elliot est parti tout seul. Et je me suis retrouvée comme une idiote.
And so I always think that characters are made to escape us creators. I always think that the writer is kind of like Geppetto holding the strings to the puppet, but at some point the puppet cuts the strings and just walks away. And so that's what happened with Ella. When Ella became Elliot, he cut the strings, and I found myself quite stupid watching him walk away.
Je ne sais pas ce que je serais devenue si j'étais une adolescente en 2025.
I don't know who I would have become if I had been a teenager in 2025.
Je n'aurais peut-être pas eu de fille.
Maybe I wouldn't have had a daughter,
Et je serais devenue Elliot.
and maybe I would have become Elliot.
And that is a very good transition for our final speaker, Chiara Gregori, who's an Italian gynecologist and sexologist, and is providing the role models for people today, the kids today, who to have the tools and the resources that Marie-Aude, for instance, didn't have growing up. So she is an author as well of various books of sex education, Sexuality Explained to Children, of Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow is one, a book about pleasure, and hopefully we'll have time to get back to that, and also a book, Yo Sono Yo, I Am I, about refusing gender conditioning. So if you could tell us, maybe just, I have so many questions, so I think maybe I'll start with you and then I'll have the second round of questions with you also. So, but if you could tell us about the difference of writing non-fiction books. Most of what we've discussed so far have been fictional stories, whether for kids or comics or different things, but the need for good sex education and open sex education, maybe to start with that, and then the second question, the second round would be the use of books, were you inspired to write the books because you lacked the tools in working with the people you were working with, and how they deal with books, how important are books for helping them to find out their own identity, having role models, the role of books. So that's a double question.
Okay, hi. Well, actually, I think that writing non-fiction books about these matters, with these subjects, is very, very important. In a way, it's what I did when I was at medical school. I was looking for the novel. I was looking for stories in the scientific pages. For example, I was very charmed, very fascinated by the way we heal from wounds, the way we create scars, and also by the way we develop cancers. It's a very, very interesting thing, and it can see as a story. And so that's what I'm trying to do now. I'm giving science to stories, to lives, because I think that sometimes the idea that we have that these subjects are too complicated to be handled is a big part of the taboos, the fixing the taboos through generations, passing over the taboos through generations. So what I like to do is giving the few info that we need to be able to speak freely about sexuality, about pleasure, about gender identity. We definitely need to have some tools. They are not so many. So I think that people should stop saying, oh, it's so complicated, let's not talk about it. And then there's this silence that creates ghosts in children's lives. And so we do need to speak about these subjects, and we can do it in a very warm way. Science doesn't imply to be cold or very detached. That's not the way I am as a physician, as a gynecologist, and as a sexologist. So I want a very simple and warm science, and that's why I began to write some non-fiction books, because sometimes I was really surprised by the, I don't know how to say, but by the attitude that patients, because people I usually meet are patients, towards science, toward anything that is medical. And I wanted to say, science is at your service. It's not the other way around. So it's not you that you have to, adapt in some way to science, but it's science that needs to come toward you and make you feel at ease with yourself, with your emotions, with your body. And I also wanted to create something beautiful, because these subjects are beautiful. So sometimes there are non-fiction books about sexuality and all these subjects, but they are, in my opinion, not beautiful. And so sometimes you just take the book and you read it and you share the reading with maybe the kids you have around, but then you put it back because, it makes you feel somehow uneasy. And I wanted something that you would want to leave around the house. And so the books I created are beautiful, I think, like the colors and the illustrations are really beautiful. Also because beauty opens up our hearts and maybe lower our defenses, and we definitely need to feel safe when we face such subjects. And so I want I wanted and I still want people to feel in a safe environment, in a safe place when they deal with these subjects, and so that's it.
And so, I mean, in working with the patients, are books one of the ways that they feel safe, different than talking? I mean, how do books?
Yeah, I think, well, in a way, when you read a book, you are in your own room and you have intimacy. And these subjects, I think, really need intimacy. And so it feels weird speaking about intimacy in places like this. Also, when I go in schools and there are, like 100 of students and we speak about their intimacy, it's somehow weird, it feels weird. And also when a patient comes to see me and he or she has to open up and also for a gynecological check. The woman meets me and after a few minutes she needs to get undressed and be there in that very awkward position. And so I want to make people, patients and people, feel protected and that their safe space is there for them. Books are a way to get in the bedrooms or in the private spaces of people, and also it's a way of reaching more people. So since I adore, maybe this is something very personal and a little narcissistic, I adore when a person steps out of my outpatient clinic feeling relieved. And so I wanted to do the same with people that I cannot meet in person, and they could meet my books and maybe feel somehow relieved from some burdens, that they could have some doubts that are really, haunting their daily lives.
I do want to ask Annie about the use of books in the classroom, but first I'm going to ask, so we're having this conversation in English, and English is a non-inflected language, so all nouns and adjectives are not gendered the way they are in all of our languages when we're working. So I mean, in Spain, masculine and feminine, we don't have a good gender neutral yet. So I want to ask, and actually, because I thought of this when I was reading the title of your book in English, I automatically put together in English in a gender neutral form in a way that Italian doesn't have. So I wanted to ask, does Italian, does Italian or does French, does Filipino, and does Dutch have a gender neutral? Do you use it in your writing or in the books that you're publishing? And just how does that work? Because I think that, you mentioned taboos, but the kids themselves don't have the taboos. These are things about the Uber society, and we all communicate in languages that are so heavily gendered and the gender markers that to create trans and trans-inclusive works can be very difficult to, you have to dismantle the cis-hetero patriarchy in order to be able to express ourselves.
Well, Italian does not have a neutral expression, but I would like to point out that I think that kids do have taboos, but they are our taboos. Fetuses, like newborns, do not have taboos, but they can breathe, they can get our taboos like in a day. Also because there are all the expectations that pregnant women and couples develop during the pregnancy, and so the taboos are they start since the very first day for the newborns. So that's why I would like to work before. Otherwise, it keeps being something that we have to do after. In medical language, we would say secondary prevention. I would like to do the primary one. That is, stop being so with such a binarism of reality. We do not have like girl-like clothing, boy-like clothing. I mean, not biologically. It's all cultural, and we do not need that binarism anymore. And because I don't want people feeling unsuitable to themselves only because we keep thinking that there are boy-like or girl-like things.
Sure. So the question was originally about inclusive language.
Does French have a
in
gender
French?
neutral, and do you use it in,
okay.
in the writing?
So the French have a long way to go. L'Académie française, the French Academy, does not recognize most of these innovative ways of speaking more inclusively right now. But we have a pronoun, a neutral pronoun. So she is elle, and he is il, and so yel has become I-E-L, yel has become the neutral pronoun, the most used one, but there are many ways to try and reinvent the language. There's a researcher called Alferaz, who is the specialist of French inclusive language. I can send you some info about that. But we do make a lot of portmanteau words. For example, a female player is une joueuse, a male player is un joueur, and we can say les joueuses. So we combine both to create a neutral substantive for the plural. There are many ways to try it out. Usually people get a little like this, and if you just keep speaking, they will get used to it. So yeah, you just have to pull through, because it is a very gendered language, but we have many ways to make it fun and accessible.
For Filipino, we're fortunate because it's a gender-neutral language. So when we say the pronoun siya, it could be he or she, it could be a man or a woman. When we say kanya, it could be his or her. So we're good.
Yeah, I think Netherlands is just the same as France. So we are getting there. We have, sometimes we use the Dutch equivalent of them or they, and sometimes we use die, which is something else. Yeah, it's slowly maybe getting somewhere.
In Spanish, we don't have any consensus. I mean, this is one of the things that I deal with quite a lot, especially as a translator. I translate a lot of non-binary and trans writers who use clear, inclusive language in English, and to figure out how to recreate that in Spanish. There was one poetry collection where the author used, instead of woman or women, she X'd out the vowel, W-O-M-X-N. So that's a trans-inclusive language. The TERF version, the trans-exclusionary version, which hopefully no one here in the audience would use, would be to use women with the Y instead. But since she had X'd out, what I and my co-translator decided to do was to X out the use of masculine as the neutral throughout the poetry collection. Because hombre is not in mujer and mujeres in Spanish, the way that man and men are in the word woman. So they wanted to X that out. So we X'd out using masculine as neutral throughout the whole poetry collection. That was our decision to do that. The only problem is that you can't speak that. So in Spanish, you know, this was something, I think that book was in 2018. Today, the tendency is to use E. So instead of amigos or amigas, it would be amigues. And in Spain, there is a lot more in certain circles. You know, sometimes it would be bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. You know, and you would have all three. Sometimes they would just go directly to bienvenides. You know, I think that the only reason we need to have or I think with just as a comment with names, like my name Lawrence is a masculine name in English, Laurence in French is a female name, you know, and so a lot of names for that are not common to your language, a lot of people get nervous. They're like, I don't know the gender, and it's like you don't need to know the gender unless you treat people differently depending on what their gender is, you know, and so the lack of having language that is gender inclusive just underlies the power imbalance. So, Annie, if you can tell us about the use of books in the classroom and the need for these books as role models, not just for kids themselves, but for also all kids to see queer lives as worth being part of our culture.
Okay, so aside from publishing, I also founded a K-12 institution. So I run a school, and I just wanted to share that, well, the Philippines had the longest lockdown during COVID. So kids were out of school for 2 years. So we were in online school. I know it was crazy. So we were online for 2 years, and that's when we all noticed that the kids were indicating their pronouns beside their names, their preferred pronouns, and they were also changing their names. And the name change was consistent with like their new gender identity, and they wanted us to acknowledge it, the adults to acknowledge it. And it's so common for me because I wear two hats that my work in school would fuel into my work in publishing and the other way around. And in this case, it was the work in school that I felt like we needed more children's books and young adult books on gender identity. And anyone who works in children's books knows that when you make a children's book, you're talking to children, but you're also talking with adults, you're talking with parents, you're talking with teachers. And my ulterior motive was, when we come out with these books, kids will enjoy them, but I also wanted the parents who would read these books to develop a vocabulary for identity, a vocabulary for feelings, so that they would be able to support their kids better, their students better, their kids better, and there would be more acceptance and more love for them.
That I think can go very well to maybe if Edward and Chiara can talk a little bit about pure joy and pleasure. There a lot of times I think breaking down societal issues, breaking down the cis-hetero patriarchy. Very often you have surface level things, my brother is gay or I'm gay. That's sort of the surface level book. And then you would have a secondary book where that is still an important element in the plot, but it's still part of the motor of the plot. What we're striving for, I think, is integrating all of our lives. We exist in the world, our kids exist in the world, and so we need to be in literature and to be expressing queer joy or pleasure sexually. So maybe we would just talk about how do we do that? How do we do that as creators, as writers, to express that, especially to be inclusive when it's not always your own identity. You have a book about undoing gender from a non-fiction point of view, Yo Sono Yo, or including, you have so many books which are so inclusive in so many ways, from characters who are not you. How can you do that and celebrate maybe for all of our creators or just readers who are here?
No, that's a wonderful question. Thank you. I have to answer in two ways. The first one is when I wrote one of my first books, it was 1999, and I just wanted to write a young adult book because I loved the way my publishing house was publishing young adult books. That was the only reason. And then I thought, what should I write about? And then, of course, I wrote about someone falling in love with a boy falling in love with another boy, because that's what I had experienced myself. And then I was checking a little bit on queer stories at that time, and I found out that most of the stories were always, there were some queer personas, but they were always sad. There was always something with death. There was something with AIDS. There was something with a brother that died, and so on. So, as if the writers needed a bigger problem to be able to speak about being queer. And then, I don't even think I thought about it a lot, but I just wanted to write a book about the unbelievably fantastic feeling that you fall in love, and this is what love is. I found it. So, the only thing I knew to do, that I could maybe do, was to talk about falling in love from as within as I could get. So it's really from the heart, from one boy to another. So having that experience, I think the answer to maybe getting more understanding and so on is just to write better and to write as much from within. And it also goes with writing about maybe a refugee situation or someone with some mental illness that you don't have yourself. You have to do research. You have to meet people that can tell you about these things, and you have to recognize those people and also put their names in the book. Tell them who helped you, or maybe even put their name on the book. Sorry, this is something I really care for, so that yeah. So I think that is one thing. Another thing is nowadays, of course, we've seen the last year and even longer that there is a lot of pushback, and it's getting stronger, and it's fueled from groups, far-right groups from several places. And queer joy is still important, but I don't think only the queer joy can help us. So I also think at some point there should be, and luckily there are some books that address these things, address these far-right things that are happening, the undercurrents that are threatening our society as a whole. And I also think in those books we should express some hope. I mean, actually those books I think should have two messages. One message is, this is what's happening, don't look away, but also, we are strong, we did this before, and we will do it again. So I think, for me, queer joy is also that. It's also optimism.
Well, writing about things that I have not lived on my own skin is kind of like easy for me, because my job is not being the main character of the setting, and it's very important that I am there with a person, but then there are their lives, and so I'm lucky in a way, because that's what I usually do, and I can meet so many lives, experiences. I've been working for 25 years in an outpatient clinic for migrant women and their kids, and so I can meet women coming from all over the world, having to deal with their health, sexual health, and so it's wonderful for me. And about the second question, so speaking about pleasure, I think it's somehow the same about speaking about joy. Pleasure is what really drives our developing of the brain and our way of growing up, learning everything. And so even learning how to walk, how to do everything, but then maybe especially in Italy, not to mention again Catholic religion, but then pleasure is even more a taboo than sexuality. And I really was able to notice that after the first book about sexuality explained to kids, because when I would mention pleasure, and when I would explain what pleasure, when I explained what pleasure was, like adults in the rooms would, they would relax. It was so nice to see that if you explain pleasure to kids, and then even everybody relaxes, because it's a very important subject. It's not about only erotic pleasure, it's about pleasure in general, and this is really important for everybody to know, especially when we work, for example, about desire, low sexual desire, and we are very surprised to have a very low sexual desire, but at the same time we do not get pleasure from anything that we do. And so it's very important to put back in the subject, in the setting, the pleasure as a very important aspect of our lives.
Thank you. I'm very aware that we're running out of time. I will mention just one thing about writing. So my first book of stories was The Drag Queen of Elfland, which was fantasy stories with LGBT characters. And basically there are 4 different ways that you can write that combination. So you can write these stories for a fantasy reading audience and explain the LGBT content, or you can take for granted that it's an LGBT audience and you explain the fantasy content, or you can write for my parents and explain both the LGBT content and the fantasy content, or you can write these stories for queer geeks, who are fans. So, there are 4 different ways that we have, and I think that a lot of times, or the earlier books about queer lives were always written by outsiders about our lives, and one of the great things that's happening is we have more and more books from the inside, and also that anyone should also be including all of us the same way that, I was raised, I only read heterosexual books as a kid, and that didn't make me heterosexual. The same way that a lot of parents with my books, the ones that Adarna published, they're like, oh, these books will make you gay, and it's like, no, the books may make you not homophobic, but they're not going to make you gay. So, trans books, queer books are for everybody. So we are out of time. I'm sorry, we have so much stuff. I don't know if everyone has to go. I'll also stay around if people want to come up and talk to us a little bit afterwards. Thank you all for sharing all of these very, very important and very different experiences.